No, I feel the opposite, I feel more comfortable.
Let's get this going. Welcome everybody to Sunday Sit. This event is put on by the residents up at the Monastic Academy in Lowell, Vermont, and it's an opportunity just to hear some Dharma talks and do some practice together. We're a residential community in Lowell that's devoted to combining rigorous meditation training and also service. So if you're curious, there's plenty of ways to find out more, and I hope you enjoy the talk this evening. Uh, 19 years ago, today, in Okayama, Japan, under Taigen Shodo Roshi, I was ordained as a monk in the Rinzai Zen school of Buddhism. So today is, in that tradition, my birthday. It's a time of celebration of the affiliation, the connection formed with the lineage of the Buddha that has been maintained over thousands of years now. I had already gone to college for 2 years at that point. I didn't have a very good time there, wouldn't you say?
I would.
College is hard for me because they kept trying to teach me things that didn't matter, at least not to me. They taught me extremely powerful tools that wise and caring people should have, but which people who are not wise or caring should not have. Because if we have those tools, those very powerful tools, if we're not wise and caring, then we'll misuse them and perhaps eliminate life on this planet. So I knew that I didn't have a very good grasp on what it was to be wise or caring. And so I had no interest in gaining those very powerful tools that we can use to. And so I was frustrated there at college, and twice I had left college and gone to the monastery in Japan. And so at this point, I had been training there for 3 years, I think. 2 or 3 years. The timeline is a little confusing. So after that period of training, for that period of gradually learning what it was to live in a monastery and to follow a rigorous path that wasn't up to me, after learning to deeply question my assumptions about right and wrong, and after having learned a little bit how to pay attention, how to observe carefully, after all of that, I realized that perhaps it would be a good idea to get ordained. I didn't know if that would be a good idea or not. I actually went back and forth about it many times. I went to the Roshi and said I want to get ordained, and he said okay. It was very kind of him. And then I went to him a month or two later and said, actually, I don't want to get ordained after all. Not that interested in that. And then a month or so later, I went back and said, no, I definitely want to get ordained, and then go back again and say I didn't. And I was still confused about it actually on the day of the ordination. And at that point, my mother here and much of my immediate family and much of my extended family and some friends had come to Japan. And yet that morning, I was still confused about it, if this was a good idea. And I had a moment of real questioning in a room adjacent to the big hall where the ordination was going to take place. I deeply asked if this was a good idea. And I found was that it was a good idea as long as I didn't allow the tradition to impede my journey, my path. And so I was ordained, and as it turns out, I, the person I am now, to a large part created by that event, and say that that was an excellent choice for me. It was an excellent thing to do. The talk today is about that. It's about why is it we would create traditions? Why is it that we would create structures and lineages, systems that we would use to practice this path? Why not just do what we do? I read a lot of people who talk about this, who say spirituality isn't something that can be taught. Spirituality isn't something that can be conveyed. So it's a totally personal path, and therefore you should practice it on your own, yourself. Not something to try to pass on. And this sentiment has been acknowledged since the very earliest period in Buddhist pedagogy. The sense that there's no need to try to teach this. It can't be taught. And so then, why create nowadays, actually, the word religion, I think, has a negative connotation for many people. Religion is a bad thing that can't be trusted. So why? Why would we have that sense? What can we do about it to make the traditions that we create into positive forces in the world. This creation is one aspect, one of two primary aspects of the word development in the name of our community, the community for the experience and development of awakening and responsibility. In the coming weeks, we'll talk about awakening and responsibility. What are these two qualities and skill sets? But first, we're talking about experience and development. So this sense of development, for now, let's talk about its external component. What is the external form of development? Well, at first, of course, we start off and we think we're pretty much right about pretty much everything. And if everyone else would just be more like I wish they would be, then the world would be a better place. And that's, you could say, the beginning of the path. That's the most immature state of mind. But then we realize that maybe there's a journey for me to take. What is it that allows us to realize this? That first view is a view of enormous insecurity, often shame and self-hatred. And it's because of that, it's because we don't have the confidence to believe that we could walk a path, that we discount the significance of a spiritual journey. There isn't the belief that there could be another way to do things, another way to see things, another way to know things. We just don't believe that we could go beyond who we now are. There isn't that sense of deep confidence. As a result of that, we're at that stage until, for whatever reason, we gain that confidence. In general, the reason we gain that confidence is because we start doing kind, caring things. We start doing those things. And then because we're doing those things, we have more of that confidence, and so we're willing to do more of those things. So that path of ethical behavior, which we call responsibility in this, that leads us to a path in which we want to take a spiritual journey. We want to go on a journey, and so we start exploring. And this is absolutely real. And it's very good. And many people have come to the point when they're taking that journey. And it's a very powerful experience. And as we throw ourselves into it, there's the sense that that this is the right way. And at that point, it is. It's very, very good for us to do it on our own, in our own way, exploring, because that's how we gain self-confidence. It's how we gain more self-confidence. We gain the confidence to believe that we can do this because we are ourselves actually doing it. We're not making use of a tradition. And so that's completely appropriate. It can actually be problematic for a person at that stage to make too much use of a tradition. And yet, as we do that, we gain in the confidence to believe that it's possible to overcome our obstructions, to overcome suffering. It's possible for us to make a difference. And as we see that, then we begin to see what we had only glimpsed previously. We knew before it was important to change our behavior, but it wasn't so clear why. There was a vague sense that there are problems in the world, that there's suffering in the world, that I suffer, that my loved ones suffer, that actually everyone suffers, and so there's something that needs to be done, so we try to do it. And yet, at this point, with more self-confidence, that suffering becomes very powerful. And we realize, in our experience, the experience of the suffering of the world becomes powerful for us. And so we realize that just continuing on a path that I'm discovering naturally actually isn't good enough. It's not a full enough response to the problems in the world. And we realize that again because we have the confidence to realize that. We have the confidence to believe that there may be something even beyond our own personal spiritual journey. We realize that there may be ways of increasing the speed of that. And so at that point, we enter an official tradition. We enter some kind of official training. This official training can be specific meditation techniques. It can be a specific religious doctrine. It can be a community that we go to, like this one, in which we learn how to catalyze, how to support our spiritual journey. And we discover, as long as we have sufficient self-confidence, that that doesn't prevent us from practicing. It doesn't just confuse us. We have the self-confidence to make use of those tools without being trapped by them. And because of that, it does work. And we see even more that we can make a difference, that it's possible to intentionally structure our minds, our lives, so that we can move on, we can continue on in the journey at a faster, more efficient pace than we would have if we had simply gone our own way. We see that the techniques that have been passed down enable us to walk our own journey that no one else has ever walked. And it doesn't restrict us to some set of experiences that other people think we should have. Now that's extraordinary. And again, it indicates an increasing maturity. Because of that maturity, we have self-confidence. Because of that self-confidence, we can see the suffering of the world even more clearly. And because we see it even more clearly, we may want to take the next step. And the next step is that we move into a full-time program. We completely change the way we live so that our way of life is completely compromised, completely subsumed by a spiritual structure. Again, that requires a great deal of self-confidence because it's easy, if we don't have that self-confidence, to enter a system like that and simply be crushed by it. We're no longer creative. We're no longer having fun. We're no longer experimenting with new things, and we're no longer finding our own way. On the contrary, all of those structures are too much for the strength that we've found up until that point. And so we are unable to function freely. But if we have that self-confidence, if we've generated that level of maturity, then we can be in that system and continue to be the master of our own lives. And to the extent that we have a deep self-confidence, a deep connection to our own sense of ethics, we're able to give ourselves to a community like that. And even, as many communities have, that have teachers, give ourselves to someone's teaching, to someone's insights and reflection regarding our own path. And so we enter that community, which may even have a teacher-student relationship involved in it, and we're able to function freely and beautifully within that. As we do that, we're even more thrown into an awareness that there is suffering in the world, that something needs to be done. And we realize that in the same way that at first we could see clearly that our lives needed to change, in the very first stage, when we stopped thinking, okay, if everyone else would just change, everything would be okay. when we realized maybe I should change how I live. Maybe my changing my behavior is what's needed. In the same way that at that time, there was an understanding primarily of the need to change how we live. At this point, we've understood that, but the emphasis has now moved to an understanding of the importance that we change the way we see, or that we change the way we know. That we change our perception, that we have a spiritual insight. So at first we're interested in changing our behavior. Now we're interested in changing our perception. Or you could say we're interested in purifying our own minds. And it's very important that we go through this stage. Very, very important. At this point, you could say we've become a monastic. We've totally changed the way we live. Why? Because we have the self-confidence to make use of that in order to catalyze, which is to say support, speed up, empower our own spiritual path, not someone else's spiritual path. We're not using that to avoid our spiritual path just to copy someone else's. On the contrary, we're using those tools in order to experience our own spiritual path that has never been experienced before. Couldn't have been written down and couldn't have been passed on, and yet we can use the things that have been experienced before, been written down, been passed on in order to have our own experience and purify our own minds. Now, this is highly significant. This is a very powerful stage and has to be experienced fully. And yet there is a further state of self-confidence, or you could say maturity. And that state is one in which awakening or purifying our own minds and responsibility, which is purifying how we live, improving how we live, in which those are completely integrated. Neither one is particularly emphasized. And at that point, our power is inconceivable. And we have the ability to alter human history, to not just serve the assumptions that have been passed down by human history and human genetics and such, but actually revolutionize that, actually change that. And finally, we see that in the past, we thought, I don't want to enter a spiritual tradition because I don't want it to prevent me from going on my own spiritual path. We suddenly see that that was just a story that was told by another system that was preventing us from walking our own spiritual path. That there was another system called history or biology or whatever you want to call it. Anything that's passed down, those things have been passed down and have found ways of preventing us from escaping their grasp. And so we were imprisoned there, and one of the walls that's built is don't practice a spiritual path because it won't allow you to walk your own true path and live by your own true nature. And so we believe that, and so we look at those paths as if that's what they are, and then because everyone's looking at them that way, they actually become that. And that's problematic, but you can look at it in a different way, you can make use of it in a different way, and you can realize that walking a spiritual path in a spiritual tradition can free us from the accumulated residue of the past that holds us captive. In seeing this, we see that actually it's even more urgent than we thought it was. That those patterns, those negative patterns, are holding the world in bondage, causing untold suffering, and there's something that we must do. So once again, as we have in each next stage, we have a bit more self-confidence, we see the suffering of the world a bit more completely and clearly, and because we see that, we're able to take the next step into the next more difficult path, the next more challenging journey. And that is that we commit to spreading these teachings, to promulgating, proselytizing, professing these structures. Obviously, this is very dangerous. If we're not at this level of maturity, we can make a lot of mistakes if we try to do this. But if we are at this level of maturity, then we can, as I say, change history. And many people have done this. Because those people are no longer thinking that they're changing history while really trying to change history with the same mind that created history, and therefore just creating more of the same history as a result of that history's ability to convince us that we're doing something new and different, when really we're just following the same patterns again. Because this group of people has freed themselves from that and has stepped forth into the unknown as a result of compassion, it's possible to have a vast impact. And so these four stages take us along a spiritual path. And what we're doing when we say development is we're working on the development of each of these stages. So we want to, of course, enable people to try to live better. We want to enable people to take on certain spiritual techniques. We want to allow people to then take it further and actually have a life in which their entire life is based around those techniques. And the emphasis is on purifying our own minds. And we want to take it even further, where we're on a path that allows us, through compassion, to integrate the way we live and the way we know, the way we see, the way we perceive. That being integrated, we can have a vast impact. And how do we have that vast impact? We have a vast impact by creating something new. The history of religion is one of change, of constant change. Naturally, certain traditions give the marketing message that we have authority because we're the same as it was 2,000 years ago. We say it's the same as what the Buddha taught, and therefore we have that authority because he was right, and so we're right. Other traditions say we're changing, we're improving, things are getting better. That's why we're better than the others. We're better because we're always changing. So science nowadays is a religion that gives this impression. Really, it's important to know that these are just marketing campaigns. Both traditions are based in thousands of years of history. Both traditions have changed through that history. All traditions share those characteristics. They have all been changing and yet are linked back to traditions that go back thousands of years. Once we accept our connection to the past, our deep connection to the past, once we accept that, then we can see that there's a great momentum going forward, and we can be a part of that creative process. But we have the humility to see that thousands of brilliant people, of the most brilliant people who have ever lived, have been working on this problem for thousands of years. And we have the humility to know that if we do our best, perhaps we won't mess it up. And if we get lucky and we do our best, maybe we can add something of value. We can add a little grain of dust to the top of that mountain. We have that humility, but we also have that confidence. And at this stage, we see that there isn't a difference between humility and confidence. The two are the same thing, because we have the humility to look all the way back and we have the confidence to look forward. And allow this tradition to flourish, to change, to adapt, to grow. And on that day that I was ordained, the Roshi gave me a name. The name was Soryu. And So means a tradition. And it has the implication of looking back through the lineage, all the way back through history, appreciating a tradition. Not just the path, not just a path, but the tradition that has been set up to maintain that path. The structures that have been created in order to free us from structures. The systems that we have that allow us to liberate our minds from systems. The ideas, the doctrines, that have been passed down that free us from ideas and doctrines. That is the tradition. And that's the meaning of so, and yu means to make something flourish, to care for something so that it can grow and become something greater than it has before, become something unknown, due to its own natural flourishing that we couldn't imagine. So this sense of Soryu is this is the same sense of this particular aspect of the word development. We're developing the tradition that has been passed down to us because we have the self-confidence to use it to become free of everything, even it. With that confidence, we burst forth and we can create something new. That creation is something that should be of benefit to the world. And so it's essential that that entire process is fed by compassion, by a continuing revelation, the depth and the breadth of suffering in the world. Those connections are called friendship. And they don't have to be terrible. On the contrary, they're empowering. Friendship is empowering and wonderful. And that we're helping each other with our problems doesn't change that. So we have this community. We base this community in direct experience and direct exploration, putting our own experience, our direct experience before doctrine. And yet and that's the word experience, and yet with the word development, we understand the importance of using doctrine, using structures, using ideas, using patterns, using culture in order to free ourselves from the prisons that we've built for ourselves and that we've built for each other. In that creative process, we develop something that's based on the past further back than we can know, and we do that in great humility. And it blossoms into a future that we can't know, and we walk into that future with confidence. The significance of the word development, the significance of creativity, the desire to be of greater and greater benefit, to not be satisfied with whatever it is that we believe our spiritual path may be, but to step beyond even that, not by throwing it away, but by fully embodying it, and therefore directly seeing the ways in which it remains inadequate. And then we have the opportunity to develop for ourselves and for the world something new. So now we have the chance to directly explore our experience with techniques and structures and doctrines in order to increase our sense of self-confidence so that we can deepen our understanding of compassion. Take a moment to adjust your posture. As you're tall and comfortable, relaxed and alert. And begin with community. Begin with an exercise in loving kindness and friendship. Consider the people in your spiritual community. For example, the people here in this room. And look upon them with friendship. Cultivate a sense of friendliness. Now, this sense of friendliness is deeper than the sentiment, I like you, and deeper than the conviction, I agree with you. It's deeper than that. There's a friendship that's prior to all that, that allows us to be with people we may not like and to talk with people we may not agree with. Cultivate that sentiment of friendship, of community. And as you cultivate that shining outward, also be willing to accept that you're a part of this, and there are people here who are looking upon you right now with that same friendship, including you and their community. And receive that. Over a time, practice giving and receiving friendship as a direct experience. If you'd like, one way to encourage this exercise is to give rise to a slight smile. Smile just a bit, gently, in order to encourage a sense of friendliness, of community in your awareness. And now, if you'd like, turn your attention from the cultivation of community and friendship to your direct experience, whatever that is. Whatever you're experiencing right now, pay attention to that. You're experiencing thoughts, pay attention to those thoughts. What is it like to think? What is your experience of thought? Again and again, try to bring it back to the direct experience of thought, as opposed to any story we may have about the thought. If we find ourselves telling a story, then have a direct experience of telling a story. We're telling a story about thinking. What's it like to tell a story about thinking? What is the direct experience of that? We're telling a story about feeling. And what's it like to have a direct experience of telling a story about what we're feeling? Perhaps we're not telling a story. Very good. What's that like? What are we paying attention to? What is the direct experience in this moment? If you're hearing the sounds around you, what is the direct experience of hearing those sounds, even my voice? Of course, you can attribute meaning to these sounds that I'm making. Have the direct experience of attributing meaning to these sounds. Or you may simply have the direct experience of hearing the sound of the human voice. The tone, the texture, the volume, the pacing. What is that direct experience? Again and again, bring your attention back to this direct experience.